Well, I was recording a bunch of things I was doing to the heat pump when I realized that quite a bit of the video was really above and beyond what the average homeowner is going to do. So I decided to make this video on what a homeowner should be doing when checking their HVAC system, whether it's an air conditioner only, a heat pump. I don't have a furnace, I have a heat pump, so I can't go into furnace. But it's just very basic stuff that every homeowner should do. And of course, I realize that I have complete access to my air handling unit, where some people, their air handling unit is either up in the attic or maybe a crawl space in the basement. So it might be a little tougher on you. When you're younger, it's not a big deal, but when you get older, it's a big deal. So, let's get started. If you're a homeowner and you have access to your air handling unit, let's talk about air conditioning. Let's just say this heat pump is air conditioner, because it'll apply to both. And we'll get right to it. So, number one, cut the power. So, with my unit, I have a heating section. It says furnace, but you know, really it's a heat pump, and the air conditioning side of the heat pump. So I have 3 breakers to throw. Also, you want to note this is in the 220 section. This is in the 110 section. So really, I'm just taking off the 220 volts. Now, even though I've done that, there's still parts of the air conditioner heat pump that are still potentially dangerous in the form of electricity. It's shocking. It can shock you, I'll put it that way, and I'll go over that. So anyway, throw the switches, throw your breakers, make sure it doesn't come on while you are looking at it or otherwise working on it. So let's go back upstairs. Okay, the first thing you want to look at is your thermostat to make sure all your settings are okay. If it's kind of complicated, if you have settings where you save energy or something, you might have timing issues where it won't come on before, I don't know, 10 in the morning, or you shut it down while you're at work, whatever. But anyway, you want to make sure all that's intact. So you want to check the condition of your battery. Make sure that it's acceptable. Now, I've taken it out, so we just lost all that, but it will remember it, believe it or not. Watch when I plug it back in. Check the dates on your battery, make sure they're okay. Maybe change them every couple of years anyway. You might want to install them so you can read them, read the dates on there. And a lot of times I will write the install date on here. I haven't done it on these, but typically I do that. Okay, we'll check the batteries. Insert those. Comes back on. Notice that it's remembered. So that's a good thing, even though the power was cut off. So that's about all you can do with your thermostat. Make sure if it's has battery backup that the batteries are okay, that they're not corroding. Make sure if you're doing your scheduling that all your scheduling is set up correctly and whatnot like that. As you can see, we go by what feels good to us. We don't set it to a temperature. We set it to a feeling. Just so happens when the thermostat is made at 74, we're very comfortable, because what you want to remember about air conditioning is technically it's a dehumidifier. It takes water out of the air and that makes it feel cooler. It's your air conditioning is conditioning the air, and what it's doing is it's reducing the humidity, and thus the temperature goes down as the humidity goes down. So anyway, I'll explain that further on. Alright, next is a filter. You want to check your return filter. This is a return air. It's sucking air in, and it'll bring air in from the house through the filter. And what I like to do is I like to write the install date Here it says July 2020. So if I open it up and see that it's a couple months old, I might swap it out no matter how dirty it is or is not. Alright, another thing with the vents, you want to make sure your vents are open. You really don't want to close off vents. If you want to close off a room, close the door, but really that affects the return. So, you know, it's kind of a little iffy there, but really you want your vents open and everything circulating throughout the whole house. Your air conditioner is sized for your house, so you really should cool the whole house. I know it doesn't seem economical, especially if you're just a couple living in a big house. You want to close everything off thinking that you'll save money, but if you do the math, you're going to find your electric bill is not going to go down that much. Okay, next is there might be an air cleaner. Oops. There might be an air cleaner on your air handling unit. It might go between the return and the air handling unit. So if you have one in there, you know, you might want to check it or change it. We don't have one. Your condensate line. You want to make sure that is clear. You want to be very careful about pouring chemicals down there. This piping can withstand a lot, many different chemicals and cleaners. However, you just want to make sure that your trap is clean in here so that it drips out. I really don't like or recommend these kinds of traps here. I even forgot what it's called. It's been a long time. What I do like about it is you can see it. However, they're not really all that good. But since this is out in the open and I can clearly see a crack in them, or if it's not functioning properly, you know, it's there. Also, it has a bunch of access ports. Can easily clean it. So I'll just run my brush through if I need to. Anyway, make sure your trap is clear. Okay, air handling unit. Have some cutoff switches right here. You can throw them or not. You're cut off at the panel. But you can cut those off if you want to. Typically, all of these air handling units are still standard, so if you want to get your, in my case, 5/16 and take off the 4 nuts that hold the top panel on, you can do that. There's some good information on your label. It tells you what kind of refrigerant you have. Which a homeowner, it doesn't matter because you're not going to be buying refrigerant anyway. You need a card to purchase refrigerant, and also there's laws involved venting to atmosphere. You're allowed to clear your lines, but you're not allowed to vent to atmosphere. Now if you have a leak or something, as a technician, you would go in and you would recover as much as you can to fix the leak. And then I won't go on any further. But anyway, you can see the manufacturing date and see how old it is and what model it is. Okay, with the power off, you can take, and the screws out, you can take the panel off, and that will reveal the upper side of the air handling unit. A lot of times these are laid on their side, but still the lower unit won't come off. The top panel has to come off first, so if it's laying on its side, the motor panel will come off before the coil panel will come off. And what you want to notice is the start capacitor. That most likely still has a charge in it, so you really don't want to be touching the ends. However, you do want to examine it, and of all my years of owning a home and dealing with HVAC systems, either at my house or at other people's houses, I'm not a service technician, Want to point that out. I've only had training, and I have a refrigerant card where I can legally buy refrigerant. Been to school, took the test. Anyway, what I want to point out is on the motor, the start capacitor is most likely still charged. You don't want to touch that. You can take a screwdriver and touch the two ends to discharge whatever current electrons are still in there if you want to. But the main thing is to look at it. If the end here is bubbled up, it may be going bad. Or if the fan's not coming on and everything else seems to be working, but the motor isn't rotating, you don't hear it firing it up, and you see that it's all bulged right here, odds are you need a new start capacitor. That's the telltale sign. Next, this is a heat pump, so this is kind of the heating section. You really can't see the coils unless you pull them out, or if you pull the fan out and look up underneath, but we're just talking about air conditioning. So you just want to look at the fan. You want to look to see if there's any mold building up in here. You may have, there's like 4 screws that hold this on. You may have to take these screws out, pull the fan out, clean it up if you see a lot of mold and stuff here that you'd like to get rid of. Your electrical section, I've added this temperature gauge. Pay no attention to that. Probably didn't even notice it. But the sorry, I was zoomed into the fan the whole time I was talking. Anyway, this is a temperature gauge I have on the side. I'll show it to you. That's just so I don't have to take the panel off. I can see if it's working okay. Here are the heater coils up here. If you take the fan out, you can look up underneath and see the heater coils. And then that's blowing air up into the house. And really you just want to look at the wires and see that nothing's rubbed or shorted or blacked or disconnected or whatnot like that. You want to look at your fan, make sure your fan's okay, not a lot of mold on it, dirt, buildup, whatnot like that. Your motor, some motors are sealed permanently and some motors have a maintenance port on them where you can add oil. Okay, on the motors that can be serviced, you can see a little yellow plug. You remove that plug and you put like 1, maybe 2 drops of oil in there, you know, your little can of 301. Put a couple drops in there. Now what's really bad is on the other side of the motor there's also one for the other end, for the bushing on the other end. So what these things are is they have a bunch of, on the ends here around the bearing there's a bunch of cotton. I'll call it cotton just for speaking purposes, and that oil lubricates the cotton, and then the cotton lubricates the bushing that holds the shaft that's spinning around, and there's one on either end. So the other one's really tough to get to. Originally there were 2 hoses that came out, and you just put a drop in each hose and it would run down the hose to the front of the motor. So it's no fun to lubricate those, but you can put a drop in there if you want. If you need to get to the front, you can either stick your hand in there and feel your way around, or you can pull the whole thing out. They're just 4 screws. Just pull the whole thing out and you can get to the side and pull the plug out, put a couple drops of oil in there, put it back in and slide it back in if you're that ambitious. Also on newer units, doesn't matter whether they're cheap or expensive, that doesn't matter. Sometimes the motor is sealed, and that, as they say, is that. I'll show you a sealed motor. I have one outside on the outside unit, and there's no lubricating that one. I also have a video where this motor went bad and I replaced it. So if you want to hunt that down, I think I just said air handling unit, motor replacement. But what happens is the bearings eventually wear. they're like bushings. And so since they're solid and they're not roller bearings, you know, just over time laying flat like that and the weight of the fan on the end of the shaft, it just wears out over time. So replacing the motor, that's fun. That's also beyond homeowner. You can do it, but if you don't know what you're doing, I just don't recommend messing with it. Alright, quick review. As a homeowner, you can just inspect the condition of the motor, maybe put a couple drops of oil in the bushing areas if it's not sealed to begin with. Again, worst case scenario, you can pull this out, but be careful. This guy could be charged. Oh, let me show you something. Alright, if you do find this bubbling out and you need to replace it, maybe the fan's not working, you can read the tag, and the important numbers are the microfarads, this one's 10, and the voltage, 370 volts AC. And it has 2 connections on it. And what you want to notice is that this is flat. If you see it bulged out, if it's still working, you're lucky. And if not, you know what's wrong. So anyway, also if you see oil on them, that's bad too. So if you see oil dripping off the end here, bad news. Keep a spare because they go out late Saturday night and the technician's not going to come to your house until late Monday afternoon. You know, he says you're going to be first on the list, and then he doesn't show up till 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So keep one of these on hand. It might save you. Now your outside unit, I'll show you the one on the outside unit. We're getting ready to go out there next. And again, it's the same thing. If it's bubbled up, rust doesn't matter, but if it's bubbled up instead of being flat, most likely it's going bad, or it is bad. Especially if the fan's not turning, compressor's humming, fan's humming, you hear a lot of humming, and then you see that it's bubbled up here, probably going to have to replace it. And then again, this one runs both the compressor and the fan. This is a common. So what you want to read is there's usually 2 numbers, one for the compressor, one for the fan. So this is a 55.5 for your microfarads. And of course your voltage is on here at 370 volts AC. So you want to read those numbers and then match it up exactly. Now what you're going to find out is you may buy one that's smaller in diameter than your clip out there. So you have your holding clip, you may have to make it fit somehow by bending it. A lot of times just squeeze it here and pucker it out the middle, and that'll take care of the situation for you. But anyway, those are about all the homeowner can do. Cleaning coils. So let's say you look down there and your coils are a mess and you want to clean them. Well, you want to be very careful of cleaners and detergents that you use on aluminum. Some are very detrimental to aluminum. So some of your cleaners are bad news. So be very, very careful what kind of cleaners you use, especially on your outside unit, and I'll talk about that when I get out there. So if you have a foaming cleaner, make sure there's no paint on there. I'll explain when I get out to the outside unit. And that it does not harm aluminum. Things like the only thing I know immediately without naming the chemicals is like purple power. Purple power will get on that aluminum and chew it up. So be very, very careful of things like purple power on aluminum parts. So we're kind of done in here in the inside air handling unit, so we can put the panel back on. So again, make sure your hose is clean, your filter is clean if you have one. Make sure there's no mold growing on here. Lubricate your fan if you can, if you want to. Make sure all your electricals are in good shape, nothing shorting out somewhere, you don't see marks anywhere. Make sure your breakers are okay, meaning that they function. So you've turned them off, you'll turn them back on, the unit will come on. Just kind of visually inspect everything. Just get familiar with it, inspect it. That way, even if you don't know what's wrong and you have to call a service technician, at least you'll be familiar with the parts. So if he points to the transformer and says, man, you got a bad transformer, you'll know he's pointing to the transformer and you got a bad transformer. So anyway, things like that. Just be aware of what's going on. Be familiar with it. You see I've written 5/16, so I know what tool size to use when I put these back on. Oops. And it won't go back on unless it's all lined up. So you gotta put the panel on correctly, else the holes won't line up and you won't be able to tighten it down. Okay, we're outside now, and even though you've thrown the breakers on your main power panel, you want to disconnect the power outside also. If you look at mine, what you can see is the on is revealed, so you can actually pull it out, flip it over, plug it back in, and what you want to notice is that the off is revealed. However, I just take it out completely, set it up on top. That's what I do. But anyway, you can, if you have this situation here where you have the on and off, you can, whatever you're reading, that is the position that it's in. If you can read the off, it's off. If you can read the on, it's connected. Alright, this is just a cover. You can take the screw out here and look in there, but we're assuming everything's normal and you're just doing maintenance, just doing the safety precaution of pulling the electricity out of your inspection process. Okay, here we are at the top of the unit, and you can do a fan inspection. I'm going to pull this off. I have a bunch of debris in there. It's not bad, but I'm going to vacuum it out. So I'm just going to find the right tool to use and take these screws out. Okay, I have the screws out, but before I remove the fan, what you want to notice is there's electricity, there's a power cord going to the fan, so that's going to restrict your movements so that, you know, you can only do so much. And here you can see it's pretty rusty. Mine camera, yeah, I guess it's pretty rusty, but you know, it's still working. It's not making a bunch of noise. It doesn't sound like a screaming banshee at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, just inspect the fan, maybe clean it up if you want to. The reason I'm taking this off, there's some debris down here, pine needles, just tree stuff. I'm going to vacuum out. However, the main thing I'd like to point out is that this motor is sealed. There isn't a little plug on the end that you can pull out and oil. If you wanted to oil this, you'd have to pop that cap off and wet the cotton. I'm calling it cotton. The material that's inside in there that lubricates the bearing. But however, since it's not in a horizontal position, odds are it'll last a lot longer than the inside unit as far as the bearings are concerned, the bushings, if you will. So anyway, that, as they say, is that this thing will really scream if the bushings go bad on it. So I have some debris in mine, you know, it just fell in there, and I'm going to vacuum it out. That's kind of a side story. It's part of the maintenance if you want to do it. Also, I want you to look at the coils. Notice that they're black. The reason that they're black is they're painted. So if you get a cleaner that is so harsh that it's going to take the paint off of that, the paint is actually going to get in there between the fins and actually clog your fins up and reduce your cooling capacity. Then all of a sudden, you know, this thing is just going crazy because it's not cooling or it's not discharging heat into the air. Also, you might have seen these hose things. You can put a hose thing on there to supposedly put on your coils and it cools it down because the water sprays on the coils and stuff. Well, that's for people who really don't understand, let's say, physics or thermodynamics. No matter how hot it gets, 110, 115, 120 degrees, it's the temperature difference. So if you're in air conditioning mode and it's 110 outside, these coils are going to be hotter than 110. So there's going to be a delta between the ambient temperature, whether the sun is on it or not, ambient temperature, and the coil temperature. And that difference is going to transfer the heat. So don't waste a lot of money on this crap. So, and also, again, be very, very careful on buying cleaners. But the only thing you can do is just kind of spray it off with a hose, maybe use some just regular dish soap if you want. Odds are, you know, after 15, 20 years, the unit's going to go bad long before cleaning will give you any kind of efficiency increase. Okay, I vacuumed it out, and the main reason I did that is if you look right in here, that's actually a water path. If rain or condensate or whatever drips in here, that's its escape path. Don't want to flood your compressor area. Here's a three-way valve. This is a heat pump, so it'll switch and make the evaporator the compressor and the compressor the evaporator as needed. So sometimes that could be fixed with a hammer. That's one of the first things we learned in heating air conditioning class. But anyway, that's beyond the homeowner. I'm sorry I even said that. Anyway, just kind of clean it out. If you want to rinse it out, that's fine, but not necessary. Now I'm going to pull the panel off because I want to show you the condenser, because that's a homeowner repair, something you should inspect. Alright, there's your sight glass. It should be clear when running. However, if you do see a bunch of bubbles and stuff going through there, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean it's low enough where you need to call a technician and add refrigerant. But you know, you can always call and have them check it. But again, if you do see bubbles in there, it doesn't mean it's low. If it feels cool in the house, if you feel comfortable, if it's working, then it's working. Now, I don't buy those super fancy $10,000, $20,000 machines. This is just a builder's grade. You know, just a very simple, easy machine, nothing to it. Maybe about a 15 seer. My electric bill is pretty low. As a matter of fact, it's ridiculously low. You know, I don't need a 20 seer, you know, super machine. But anyway, my panel access, like even with the very expensive machines, you're going to see 3 screws here, but only 2 of them take the panel off. The top one here, one on this side and one around the corner, and then the bottom one on this side and one around the corner. So you take those 4 off, at least 4 in my case, and that's it. What you want to notice is there's a through hole on this panel, and this one doesn't come out. So we'll take those 4 screws out and see what's behind there. Okay, so let's start at the bottom, work our way up. So the small line is your liquid line. And we're talking about air conditioning. Your large line that's insulated is your gas line. And then you have your ports here where you can read the gas pressure. And there's also a scale on there that lets you read the temperature in the middle of the coil. There's also a seemingly third one here for some strange reason. It's actually for the heat pump, but anyway, when it's running in reverse cycle. But anyway, that's not important because you're not going to mess with any of this. Remember, you can't buy gas, at least not legally. You're not supposed to. Next we go up a little bit, and what do we have? We have the capacitor. Again, you can take your common, which in my case is the yellow, and a screwdriver and touch the fan and the compressor start. I have them all labeled. Anyway, but even though we've pulled the power, there's still electrons in here. So be very careful. You can shock yourself pretty good. But anyway, this will get rusty. And if it bubbles up, I mean the whole thing, I mean these guys are going to be all tilted to the side. This is a big bubble in there. If it's running, it's almost gone. If it's not running, you hear it humming. The fan's not spinning. The compressor's making a hum noise. And you see that big huge bubble in there. That's probably what's wrong. And you just get out your spare, cut off all the power, and replace your starting condenser here. Also, you know, your label, should be able to read it. Have it exposed in such a way that I can read it, or the technician, if I ever call a tech to come out here and read it. Another thing that happens is on the relay, a lot of bugs will get in there. Ants in particular are really bad. They're highly annoying as far as ruining the contact point of your relay. So sometimes if it's not running, you can push that in and it runs. You know your capacitor's bad. So if you have it all hooked up and it's running, and you push in your relay and it all starts up, that's what's going on. But as a homeowner, you're not going to do that, right? Wires, you want to make sure all your wires look good. You want to make sure no rodents. For some reason, mice just love this plastic for some reason. They'll chew on it. If you see black marks on your panel, could be a rodent has eaten through and it just shorted out there. So watch out for things like that. Up here in your control panel, they're very uncomplicated. No matter how big or small they are, we're talking home units, air conditioner. You can see a resistor has gone bad. Usually it's very black around there if something's happened to your board. Also, you want to make sure everything's plugged in. It should not have been touched or loosened by anything or anyone. But you know, if you have kids or whatever, you know, someone could have messed with it, who knows. So just be very careful, make sure everything's in order. Nothing's moved, nothing's arced out. Everything seems to be fine. If you find something that's disconnected, don't freak out. It's just an option you don't have. Especially if you have a sophisticated unit. If you have a very sophisticated unit, there might be all kinds of boards and panels and everything that aren't even plugged in, or they're plugged in and they seem to go to nowhere. It's because there are other options that are not on your machine. So as a homeowner, really you just need to look over it. If it's working fine, look it over so you know what it looks like when it's working fine. And then later on, if it's not working, you look for differences or changes. And the big one mainly for a homeowner is the relay is full of bugs, or the start capacitor has ended its life. And it does that by having a big bubble. This plate here in the middle just bubbles right up. Your connectors are all off to the side. It's very easy to tell if that's gone bad. So there you go. We've had your heat pump or your air conditioning, let's call it air conditioning, inspected, looked over before the start of the season. You're ready to go and let it run. Alright, we'll get the panel back on, and you can really have fun putting these on. Sometimes it doesn't line up. Start all the screws before you tighten any of them down. That's always a good thing to do. And we have our panel back together. Plugging our electrical, make sure that you can read on. So the little notch should leave the on labeling visible. Look for bugs when you plug it in. A lot of times spiders get in there. Make sure it's in all the way. Close it up. Okay, now for the smoke test, as I like to call it. Throw your breakers back on. Your heat pump's not going to come on right away. Also, you want to make sure you do your service, and you don't want to do it in 90-degree heat, 4 o'clock in the afternoon when it's been running all day, because do it in the morning when it's cooler, you know, before it kicks on for the day. You want to listen to it, make sure it's running normal. If that's the normal amount of noise that comes out of it, you want to listen for that. Make sure it's not screaming or clanking or otherwise making sounds that you haven't heard before or that you know are bad. Same thing with the outside unit. Make sure it's running normal. Fan spinning. You can hear the compressor, maybe not. Your sight glass doesn't have too many bubbles in it. Should be solid. Just, you know, hot, straight, and normal. Thank you for watching.